Chapter 1. The Law That Claimed to Save Women by Erasing Them. Every great moral panic begins the same way. Someone points at a messy reality, declares it unacceptable, and then fixes it by pretending the people inside that reality do not exist. Japan's so-called AV new law followed the script with mechanical precision. On paper, it is a masterpiece of virtue signaling. A law so clean, so cautious, so morally pre-ironed that it could be framed and hung in a government hallway next to the emergency exit sign. Unconditional contract cancellation for 1 year after release. A mandatory 1 month delay before filming. A mandatory 4 month delay between filming and publication. It sounds humane. It sounds protective. It sounds like someone finally thought of the women. And that is exactly the problem, because the law was not written for women who actually work in the AV industry. It was written for people who have never spoken to them, never depended on their income, never had rent due on the 25th, and never lived in a freelance economy where time is not an abstraction, but a weapon. What the law assumed was simple. If you slow everything down, harm disappears. What actually happened was simpler. Work disappeared. Before the law even came into force, shoots were postponed, then canceled, then quietly erased from schedules. Production committees did the math and walked away. Risk increased, timelines stretched, returns became uncertain, and suddenly, protecting women became economically inconvenient. So the industry adapted the way all industries adapt when lawmakers pretend economics is optional. They shrank. Only a handful of top-tier actresses survived. The rest were thanked for their service and discarded. New entrants were locked out entirely. Freelancers, the majority of the industry, were wiped out overnight. Some retired, some vanished. Some were pushed toward exactly what the law claimed to prevent: unregulated, underground, non-compliant work. Congratulations, you fixed exploitation by outsourcing it to the shadows. This is the part where officials nod solemnly and say, unintended consequences. This is also the part where real women stop paying rent. A freelance actress summed it up perfectly when her July shoots were all canceled. So who exactly benefits from this law? Because it's not us. That question has never been answered, because answering it would require admitting the truth. This law does not regulate AV. It functionally bans it, while preserving just enough legal oxygen for a few marketable survivors to justify the illusion of reform. It is YouTube all over again. Algorithms decide who lives, compliance costs decide who dies, and newcomers are told to be grateful for the opportunity to disappear. The AV new law was sold as protection. In practice, it is filtration, not safety, not consent, selection. A moral sieve that keeps the profitable, discards the inconvenient, and calls the result ethical. And here's the most uncomfortable part. This wasn't incompetence, it was design. Because a society that cannot openly ban something it finds embarrassing will regulate it to death instead. Slowly, politely, with paperwork. Japan did not ask whether women wanted this law. Japan asked whether the image of women would look better without them. If this analysis already makes you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is the sound of ideology colliding with reality. This channel exists to keep that collision loud. If you want the next chapter, support the work. Subscribe, like, share. And yes, buy the products linked below. Channels don't run on moral superiority. They run on money. Chapter 2. Consent delayed until bankruptcy. The AV new law loves one word more than any other: consent. It repeats it the way a nervous bureaucrat repeats his own name in a meeting, hoping confidence will magically appear. 1 year unconditional cancellation. 1 month waiting period before filming. 4 months waiting period before release. On paper, this looks like empowerment. In reality, it is consent redesigned for people who have savings, family support, and zero urgency. In other words, not freelancers, not working women, not reality. Let's translate this into human time. A freelance AV actress does not operate on annual budgets. She operates on weeks, sometimes days. Rent does not wait 4 months for moral clarity. Food does not accept legislative intent as payment. Consent delayed is not consent protected. Consent delayed is consent priced out of existence. The law assumes hesitation is always a sign of danger. It never considers hesitation caused by hunger. By forcing delays at every stage, the state quietly rewrote the definition of a safe performer. Safe now means financially insulated, already famous, already backed by agencies, already profitable enough to justify legal risk. Everyone else, officially protected, practically unemployed. This is how regulation pretends to be feminism while behaving like class warfare. If you are wealthy enough to wait, you are empowered. If you are poor enough to need work now, you are at risk. So the law saves you by removing your choices. This is not new. It's the same logic used everywhere modern morality meets markets. Create rules that sound compassionate but only function for elites, then blame the casualties for not being resilient enough. Producers noticed immediately. Why risk a year-long cancellation window when you can reuse established faces? Why train newcomers when a single retroactive withdrawal can vaporize your investment? So they stopped hiring. They didn't protest. They didn't lobby. They simply closed their calendars, and the actresses were left staring at silence, wondering how a law for their protection made them less employable than before. This is the part nobody wants to say out loud. The law assumes women need time to think, but never asks who pays for that time. The answer, as always, is the woman herself. Meanwhile, officials congratulated themselves. Press releases were issued. Panels were held. Nobody tracked how many women left the industry because exits do not generate statistics worth celebrating. And here's the quiet cruelty. Once you leave, you vanish. No severance, no retraining, no apology. The state does not rescue you. It replaces you with a better-looking headline. So yes, consent matters. But consent without economic agency is theater. If this chapter hit a nerve, good. That nerve is reality, reminding you it exists. Support the channel if you want Chapter 3. Subscribe, like, share, buy something. Even Outrage needs funding. Chapter 3. Underground, but make it safer. When lawmakers say the word protection, what they usually mean is visibility. If something looks ugly in public, they push it out of sight and call that progress. The AV new law did exactly that. Publicly compliant AV shrank. Privately non-compliant AV exploded. Officials pretended not to notice. They warned about inappropriate AV as if it were a future risk, as if it hadn't already begun, as if markets politely wait for ministries to finish press conferences. Here's the part everyone avoids saying because it ruins the moral narrative. Underground industries do not disappear. They become worse. No cooling off period, no cancellation window, no paperwork, no protection theater, just faster deals, harder pressure, fewer witnesses. When legal production becomes expensive, slow, and risky, capital does what capital always does. It flows to places where rules are thinner and accountability is optional. The law did not eliminate coercion. It deregulated it by accident. And who ends up there? Not the famous actresses with agencies and lawyers, not the survivors who passed the new purity filter, the ones with no savings, the ones locked out by compliance costs, the ones who were protected right out of employment. This is the sick irony. The law created the exact conditions it claimed to oppose. Above ground, a tiny sanitized AV industry remains. Clean, polished, politically presentable. The kind you can point at and say, see, reform works. Below ground, everything else. The government doesn't count those women. NGOs can't reach them. Statistics don't track them. And when something goes wrong, it is no longer a policy failure. It's a personal tragedy, much easier to ignore. This is how systems absolve themselves, by pushing harm into places without lighting. And let's be honest about something else. Japan loves rules that look strict, but are selectively survivable. You see it in labor. You see it in immigration. You see it online. Platforms survive. Creators vanish. Agencies survive. Freelancers vanish. Algorithms smile. Humans disappear. AV is not special. It is simply more honest about the bodies involved. So when people say, at least women are safer now, ask them one question. Which women? The ones still visible, or the ones who had to disappear for your conscience to feel clean? If this chapter made you uncomfortable, good. Comfort is how bad laws stay popular. Support this channel if you want chapter 4. Subscribe, like, share, buy the merch or whatever is linked. Hypocrisy runs on donations. Chapter 4. The winners. Nobody mentions. Every law has beneficiaries. When lawmakers refuse to name them, it usually means the list is embarrassing. So let's name them. The AV new law did not save women. It selected winners. Large agencies with legal departments. Major studios with capital buffers. Established actresses whose faces already sell. They adapted instantly. Compliance became a moat. Paperwork became a weapon. New rules did not restrict them. They protected them from competition. This is regulation as cartel formation. The industry didn't become ethical, it became exclusive. New actresses locked out, freelancers priced out, small producers choked out, and the survivors, they were rebranded as proof the system works. This is the oldest trick in governance. Destroy the ladder, then applaud the people who were already on the roof. The state loves this outcome because it looks tidy. A smaller industry is easier to manage, easier to point at, easier to moralize about, fewer scandals, fewer complaints, fewer inconvenient stories. When casualties are numerous, officials panic. When casualties are invisible, officials relax. And let's talk about the audience because they're part of this too. Viewers didn't stop watching. They just consumed a narrower, safer, more repetitive product. Same faces, same formats, same sanitized fantasies wrapped in the language of consent, ethics as branding. Nobody asked whether this actually reduced harm. They asked whether it reduced noise. And the media played along because a clean narrative sells better than a messy truth. Problem addressed sounds nicer than problem displaced. This is why the law feels so familiar. It's not about AV, it's about control. Control over who gets to work. Control over who gets visibility. Control over who gets erased quietly. Just like platforms, just like gig work, just like every industry where morality is used to justify consolidation. So when someone tells you this law was inevitable, understand what they mean. They mean the weak were always negotiable. If this chapter sharpened the picture, good. The final one won't be polite. Support the channel if you want chapter 5. Subscribe, like, share, buy something. Even righteous anger needs hosting fees. A ban without the courage to say ban. Let's stop pretending. The AV new law is not a safety law. It is not a reform law. It is not even a badly executed protection law. It is an AV ban disguised as concern, implemented through delay, paperwork, and selective survival. Japan didn't have the nerve to say, we don't want this industry. So it said, we want it, but only if it behaves like something else entirely. This is how prohibition works in polite societies. You don't outlaw the thing. You outlaw the conditions under which ordinary people can participate. The result is always the same. A tiny legal core, a massive illegal periphery, and a public convinced the problem has been solved because it no longer has to look at it. The law assumes a fantasy performer. Financially stable, emotionally neutral, legally literate, backed by institutions. Anyone who doesn't fit that fantasy is filtered out. This isn't feminism. This is administrative hygiene. And here's the final irony. By sterilizing the legal AV industry, Japan made it less representative, less negotiable, and less transparent. Consent became a checklist instead of a relationship. Protection became an excuse for exclusion. The state now gets to say, we tried. Studios get to say, we complied. Audiences get to say, at least it's ethical now. And the women who vanished get silence. History is full of laws like this. Laws that claim to save people by making them economically impossible. Laws that reward those who already survived the system and punish those who were barely hanging on. This one will be remembered the same way, not for who it protected, but for who it erased. If you listened all the way to the end, you already understand something most people refuse to. Morality without economics is just decoration. If this channel mattered to you, do the boring but necessary things. Subscribe, like, share, buy whatever is linked. Channels don't survive on righteousness. They survive on support. The story doesn't end here, but this chapter does.